Hi, welcome to Bourne Call-In. Today is Wednesday, February 17th. And how our show works is that I've got two special guests tonight who'll answer questions for you. You have the opportunity to call in. Our number is 759-6763, and it'll be on the screen. Diana's a scribe, and she takes your message, and she'll bring the question to me, and I'll present it to them as the show goes on. I have tonight Robert Dwyer, Dr. Bob, and Dr. Bob Dwyer, and I have my brother Tom, and Tom has a lot of the government background, and Mr. Dwyer is a scientist from Woods Hole with a huge background in coastal issues and nutrient loading and everything related to it. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to them. I'll be here. And if Diane gets a phone call, call in and we'll get the question to them. If the show is running late and you have a question, call in and we'll get back to you tomorrow. Diane will take the question, we'll find an answer, and we'll call you back tomorrow. Okay, thank you. So without further ado, Bob.
Great. Skip, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And you invited me because I had made some comments in public about the proposal that's been kind of put forward by the Buzzards Bay Coalition for a relocation of the discharge from the Wareham wastewater treatment plant into the canal at the location that the Academy currently discharges its small 70,000 gallon a day wastewater flow. And they had paid for a comprehensive modeling analysis of the hydraulics or the hydrodynamics of where the wastewater would go, basically how it would dilute in the canal. And my initial comments on that were that I thought the modeling analysis and the hydrodynamics was good as far as it went at looking at initial dilution of the water coming out, but it missed a couple of important points. First, it considered nitrogen, which is one of the more problematic pollutants in the effluent, to be inert or conservative. In other words, a molecule of nitrogen put into the wastewater would dilute and then would flow out of the bay and flow over the continental shelf, never to be seen again. The real difficulty with that I had right away is that nitrogen isn't inert. It's a very bioactive fertilizer. Everybody uses nitrogen of various forms as fertilizer on their lawns and in their gardens, and it's great at growing plants. And in Buzzards Bay, what it would do is grow algae. The other concern I had was that other constituents that are in the wastewater are similarly not conservative. There are going to be some concentrations of suspended solids that necessarily come out of every wastewater flow. Suspended solids at some point aren't suspended. They settle down onto the bottom when the flow slows down, like in all of the side bays off the main channel of the canal. And my third concern was that the wastewater is going to include a number of other constituents that aren't even regulated right now. There's a whole plethora of what they call emerging contaminants, contaminants of emerging concern that aren't even regulated by EPA. There's no safe levels that have been established as water quality criteria. And some of these substances tend to be preferentially to bind to animal tissues and organic matter. So are they going to bind to the organic matter in the sediments? Are they going to bind to the tissues on shellfish? These are all questions that the Buzzards Bay Coalition analysis didn't get into. So they've only done the first step at looking at this. And my other concern is that this seemed to be a little bit of a cart before the horse type of a situation where they've looked in detail or started to look in detail at this analysis. And I understand the reasons for that, but there are maybe many, many other alternatives to manage the wastewater, both from that flow and from all the other sources that are around Buzzards Bay. And it really needs to be looked at a comprehensive kind of watershed-wide analysis on both sides of the bay, including Buzzards Bay on this side and the towns and the counties perhaps on the other side. And I just didn't see that as far as they've gone so far. And my warning, it was a caution, not a warning, to the Board of Sewer Commissioners, was that this is the beginning of perhaps a 5-year plan, and this is the time that those questions ought to be addressed. Because once they make a decision, it's a forever decision. Basically, it's a new outfall there is going to last for at least 100 years. And there's really no going back after you've spent $20, $30, $40 million on it among all the towns.
Yeah, so, Tom.
Town of Bourne and Town of Wareham took different approaches towards growth, which is the driving factor for sewering and wastewater expansion. Back in 1987, Town of Bourne made a monumental decision. It went from 1/2 acre zoning to 1 acre zoning. And that was to tell all developers there was a tremendous push for development at that time. In fact, because Sandwich and Mashpee didn't take that type of action where we doubled the size of our zoning, they became number 1 and number 2 in the next 10 years of development. Their population just skyrocketed, but we took the approach that we did not want to develop and grow into 40 or 50,000 population as a community. And so that kept our growth down. So we didn't have the type of growth other communities experienced. Wareham, they have 18 mobile home parks. They have extensive build-up around Swifts Beach, Cremisa, along the shoreline, and they needed sewering. They needed it desperately. And they went forward, and they're in a situation now that they're desperate again. They have 2 million capacity, but they're only allowed to go up to 80%. So I think it's 1.56 million gallons, and they can't take any more. So they're looking for a solution because they're encouraging growth. Makepeace, who's the largest developer in Massachusetts and is the largest landowner, is looking to not only in Wareham but also in Carver. They have all this land and they want to develop it, and they have a right to develop it. So Wareham is looking for a solution to expansion at their site, and EPA is, indeed, Mass DEP is saying no, you can't go anymore. So that's what's triggering the need to find an alternative. The alternative of going to Mass Maritime is not a good solution for Taylor's Point or Great Gables or Wings Neck. The whole embayment over there, is going to be impacted, and the coalition's hoping that it isn't making another part of the bay worse than the Agawam River. But I think we're very concerned about that impact, and many people are speaking up. Different groups are going to send letters to DEP, EPA, and be strongly against this possibility. So, but I think Wareham needs to look at other alternatives, and like Dr. Bob said, it's not limited to one town. It's all the plants on the embayment. New Bedford's at 30 million gallons per day. Fairhaven discharges, I believe, 4 million, and Dartmouth at 5 million. There's a lot of wastewater going into the bay right now. So it has to be looked at at a bay-wide analysis. And Dr. Bob had talked earlier about Chesapeake Bay and what they did. Well, when we started Buzzards Bay project in 1985, that was our model, was the Chesapeake Bay project, and that we wanted to incorporate their modeling techniques into the Buzzards Bay Management, Preservation, and Protection document. So hopefully we will get to where we want to go.
Okay, thank you. Could you give me an idea of what alternatives may exist other than ocean outfall?
Well, there are a number, and I don't pretend to be a wastewater treatment expert,
I understand.
but there are groundwater infiltration possibilities. Again, part of this is limited in size. Some of these would necessarily have to be smaller plants. There are other alternatives. There are advanced wastewater, advanced septic systems that denitrify. This would have to be done on a household-by-household basis, but might be practical in smaller areas. The Buzzard Bay Coalition right now has they have just got a grant where they're going to be testing some of these around West Falmouth Harbor, I think. Those are some of the possibilities. There are other advanced wastewater treatment processes that are in place, for instance, to remove perfluorinated alkyl substances, PFAS substances, so to speak. We're dealing with that right now in Bourne from a spill of fire. Well, it was an oil spill where they applied firefighting foam at the Otis Rotary, and that is now migrating down into Hen Cove. But that firefighting foam was extensively used on the base, and there are 2 or 3 different alternatives. The Chemical Engineering Department at URI is looking at an advanced treatment process to pump the groundwater up that's contaminated, remove that material, and then inject it back in to maintain the kind of the dome of water that we all depend on for drinking water over here. Mm-hmm. Again, right now, my real concern is this may be a viable alternative against a number of other alternatives, but none of those alternatives have been looked at yet. And I think it behooves the town, and the town is going to be the receiving water for this outfall if this goes forward, to ask the regulatory authorities to investigate this further. This could be Mass DEP, it could be the US EPA, but these are questions that can't go unanswered. For the assimilation capacity of the bay really hasn't been established, and frankly, if you don't try to predict it beforehand, you won't know you have a problem until you've exceeded it, and then, by then it's too late.
Yeah, and just to bring everybody up to date a little bit, we do have an alternative testing facility that's run by the county, which is out the base right on, and it runs off their sewer system, and they test alternative sewer systems right there, but they're not being tested on site on the edge of the bay. They're being tested there, and this has been going on for, I'm going to say, 25 years, and local boards of health consult with them on how some of these systems are working, what are better, what are worse. Some might fail, but you learn, and that's how you have to do it. And you're tied into the wastewater system from the base, so they have a steady stream of wastewater to test these facilities. And, yeah. Okay, Tom. We've got a call. I'll give you a minute.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Who is the Buzzards Bay Coalition? They can hang this over us, and do people know of their disastrous...
So, Tom, you'll get a question in a moment, but what do you know about the alternatives? Have you had much experience with them at all?
Just did a $7 million.
Alternatives to, say, wastewater, ocean outfall, other than groundwater discharge?
More about the Buzzards Bay Coalition.
Otis
Yeah.
themselves, they ran it 7 miles over, and they did a groundwater discharge. I mean,
Yeah.
and they're only at 700,000.
Yeah.
Good.
Diane has wonderful penmanship, so we're going to be fine, you know? She's writing us a note. Oh, On another note, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and don't be afraid to call in and ask questions. There's no stupid questions. All questions are very important.
Do
And
we have a
if you
question?
have a question and you,
Diane is writing it down now.
yeah,
Yeah.
all questions are important, and you'd be surprised that what you may be thinking, how it can impact this discussion. So don't be afraid to call and ask. And I'll be right back with you. Here we go.
This whole process is going to continue to be a learning experience for everybody.
It
for,
is,
For
it
the
is, but, you know,
voters, for the towns, et cetera.
It's going to take a while. So this is Kathy Alfonso, and who is the Buzzards Bay Coalition, and what are they doing with this project proposal? So what she's asking is, what is this group, and how did they happen to have this proposal? Because this is a Wareham, Mass Maritime deal, so could you explain how it gets in the middle there?
So what happened, back in '85, we decided to go down this process of emulating the Chesapeake Bay project. And in doing that, there was 3 organizations. It was the Buzzards Bay Project, which were the scientists, and that was Dr. Joseph Costa, who led that group. There was Mimi McConnell, who was the Buzzards Bay Coalition, and then there was Ted Pratt from the cities and towns leading the BBAC, which was the Buzzards Bay Advisory Group. And the coalition is the citizen activists. They are supposed to seek public support for the governmental entities that wanted to make the changes in their communities. And the Buzzards Bay Project, the scientists gave the models and the suggested bylaws and change in regulations to, say, stormwater management, to the DPW departments, how we should change, instead of directly throwing oil, gas, and fecal coliform right into the waters because it was the cheapest way to do it, that we should probably use catch basins and treat the stormwater prior to going in the bay. So anyway, the coalition has grown. They are a large nonprofit. They're located in New Bedford, and they recently purchased the bathhouses over in Onset, which is part of Wareham. And they put $5.3 million from their donors to redo this project. So when they made that presentation the other night, sitting on regulatory boards and Cape Cod Commission and Bourne Planning Board, when you introduce yourself and you make a presentation, you tell your relationships to all parties, just full disclosure. And Buzz Bay Project chose not to do that, saying that they just signed a 99-year lease and that the landlord, and they have a financial relationship ongoing with the town of Wareham. So this is really, this is the town of Wareham leading this charge, with the front man being the Buzzards Bay Coalition. As I said before, they're in a difficult situation because they want growth. They want to increase their tax base. They look at this as an opportunity, just like we did.
The town of Wareham does, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, town of Wareham looks at this as a money-making opportunity. We took trash. We decided we'd be a regional disposal trash facility, and we take trash from the region. Wareham would like to be a regional facility for sewage. They were always a secondary plant up until the last time that they had to upgrade. And it's every 5 years you have to get a new permit. And what EPA, DEP said was you had to go from secondary treatment to tertiary treatment. So, and they did that, and the town of Bourne paid their 18% towards that as well.
And the town sends 100,000 gallons a day to the plant?
We contracted 200,000 back in 1991, but we never actually used that much. We were about 140,000 gallons per day flow.
And this comes from Buzzards Bay primarily
Comes
and heads in that
primarily
direction.
Hideaway, Main Street, Buzzards Bay, and then
Deals
contracts around. So it's really 3 separate contracts, but entirely it's Buzzards Bay. And so when we wanted, so anyway, the coalition is been putting this forward for 4 or 5 years, but they're doing it on behalf of the town of Wareham. The town of Wareham, just like us, looking for revenue. I mean, it's simple as that. And they have this facility that, you know, the feds in the states paid. We had the same opportunity in 1973, and we chose not to build the facility. So, you know, how we go forward, we are partners, and we're the minor partner. You know, Wareham's, you know, at 84, and we're like 16 or 17. So it's something that we're going to pay for no matter what decision is made here. Bourne sewer commissioners and Wareham sewer commissioners, it's a simple decision in the sense that it's always less expensive to throw the, whether it's sewerage, you know, wastewater, tertiary treated, or your stormwater, throw it into the bay. Hopefully it'll go away and not bother you again. But, you know, that's not the best way of handling that. And they know it, we know it, but it costs money. It's gonna cost more money. And that's what everybody's struggling with is how are we gonna pay for future costs if we don't do this?
Yeah.
We don't take the water and discharge it in the bay.
I do think that, you know, and you guys are both numbers guys, I know you are. The proposal, what was put forward,
There are no numbers on it.
Mass Maritime currently dumps, is allowed to discharge up to 77,000 gallons a day. They currently take between 9 and 10 million gallons of water from the Buzzards Bay Water District. So that's what they're processing and putting into the bay per year. Per year, they're putting in approximately 10 million gallons. If you take the figures given to the town by the Buzzards Bay Coalition, they'd like to put in 3 to 10 million gallons a day. Well, if you just said, okay, 5 million gallons, 5 million gallons times 365, that's over $1 billion. Then they're going to take 95% of the nutrients out of it. So what is 5% of over $1 billion? It's coming down to about 91 million. So you're going from a daily disposal of 77,000 and a yearly of 8 million. You're going to increase it to approximately 91 million. That's a big jump from 10 million to 91 million. That's 9 times. That's a huge increase. How much do you feel there'd be any impact from that?
In fact, the flow is going to increase tremendously, and it's going to be primarily fresh water.
So it'll be much more concentrated too with soaps and bleaches.
Well, it'll have the whole suite of pharmaceuticals and household care products and PFAS, which is in absolutely everything from dental floss to dryer sheets. They're going to, that material will all be there. Some of it will be treated, taken out by activated carbon, et cetera, at the plant. Maybe some of it won't. We don't know what that treatment efficiency is going to be. I must say that you know, the Buzzards Bay Coalition has done a good job, and they've identified that there is a problem in the Agawam River. Okay, this is a big plant discharging into a little freshwater stream, and as the plant got bigger, the stream basically got overloaded, and cumulative problems have shown up over and over again, and the Buzzards Bay Coalition have done a great job in recognizing that. And going from secondary treatment, which only basically kills bacteria, and it converts ammonia and other BOD, biological oxygen demand. It consumes what can be consumed, so it doesn't decrease oxygen immediately. To go from there to tertiary treatment, which will knock the nitrogen concentration down to 3 milligrams per liter.
Yeah.
To give you an example, the 77,000 gallon a day flow from the Academy right now through the existing outfall is 77,000 gallons at 100 milligrams per liter. And I won't do the math out, but the new flow could be up to 3 million gallons at 3 milligrams per liter. In total, they're going to be removing a lot of nitrogen, including a lot of it that's going into septic systems and old cesspools that are around the new areas they're talking about around unsewered parts around Buttermilk Bay and other parts of Wareham, etc. But again, that's a big flow going into a very a concentrated area. And what doesn't get dispersed by the high flow in the canal is going to end up in the side areas, and it's going to accumulate. That's my fear.
The other thing that they didn't talk about was that we were, required to, the last permit, to upgrade to tertiary. And I don't see how MMA, when they re-permit, that they're not going to be required to go to tertiary treatment. So the treatment that we're talking about at the Mass Military, which is negligible, you're talking 77,000, they're going to be taken care of by Mass DEP and EPA anyway. And I think it's going to be a huge impact for the other 3 facilities as well when, that when they go to re-permit, they're going to be looking at upgrades, which will have far more impact because they put in far more fluent. I mean, it's it's almost 39 million gallons per day down the other end of the bay that's being discharged.
That's significant. That's
It is.
significant.
Tom, my understanding is that the Academy is going to abandon their wastewater plant or make it a preliminary plant and then send the wastewater over to Wareham to be treated, and then it comes back to the big outfall.
That's their desire, but the plant has to process it. We're talking almost 10 years in the future, and that permit's only good for 5 years. So just like, if Bourne and Wareham knew that they were going to say no more discharge increase of the Agawam River, they would have walked away from the secondary treatment and went to groundwater disposal instead of spending the money on tertiary treatment. I mean, so a lot of this is done by the regulatory agencies. They set the pace for the cities and towns as to what they're going to be required
Amen.
to do.
I do have a question, but I don't believe you're going to be able to answer it. The man named Paul is called. He'd like to know the size of the pipe on the outflow now and what it would increase to handle the larger flow. And actually right now there's 2 outfalls at Mass Maritime. There's 2 permitted outfalls. One is for the swimming pool, which is 10,000 gallons, and they change that maybe a couple of times a year. I believe that's the number. I could be wrong. It might be 20,000 and they do it a couple of times a year or more. But that's a separate outfall, and they have to report that in with everything else. And then, of course, they have the outfall for their existing plant, which would handle the, let's say, 10 million gallons right now is what it's handling. I think, and this is just think, I've seen that pipe once. I think it was around 3 foot in diameter, but it doesn't mean it's 3 feet coming out in one shot. That's the diameter of the pipe I believe I've seen, and I could be way off. Do you have any ideas?
Typically, on a discharge like that, the EPA or the state will require it to discharge at a velocity of 3 meters per second, 10 feet per second. So you need that in order to get, you've seen the kinds of turbulence that you get. You need that to mix it in. And that, I think for instance, the thermal outfalls for the Sandwich power plant in the bottom are 3 meters per second. And that's a typical design criteria that EPA has. So
you have to have it so you don't have any buildup of growth that would block the pipe.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's going to be a fairly substantial pipe.
Yeah. I'm going to have to wrap it up, guys. I really appreciate you coming in. Thank you for all your input, both of you. It's been a big help. And I do want to say that our next show, which will be in 2 weeks, we're going to try to do it on the machine gun range out the base. So not that we're trying to get away from this, but we can only do certain